Hi, I'm the Red Lady, and today I'm going to talk about Knights Templar and their role as spirit guides. First of all, I should tell you what this video is and isn't about. For those who don't know the history of the Templars, I will first give some background information on them. I will also put some timestamps for you below, so if you do know their story and want to skip that part, you can do so by clicking on the video timestamps below and skip to other parts of the video. Then I will talk a little bit about the myths and the legends involving the Templars and the curse of Jaques de Molay. And I think it's important to separate the true history from the myths. After that, I'll focus on my experiences of working with the Templars in the spirit and address a few questions such as, why would the spirit of a Templar work with someone like myself who is essentially a non-Christian? And I will give you those answers, and I'll talk a little bit about how others can work with them too, how you can work with them if that's part of your spiritual development path. Because contrary to popular belief, the Templars aren't exclusive to the Freemasons. Templars in the spirit will work with those who are open to working with them, particularly those who follow the warrior path and those who are serious about their spiritual development. So this isn't a video about Baphomet or the Holy Grail or Freemasonry or the Priory of Sion from the Da Vinci Code. Although I may mention some of these, it's about spiritual development and inclusion of the Templar spirits on your spiritual and magical development path. So, as always, any sources or relevant links will be in the description box below, and please do subscribe, like and share. First of all, some background information on the Knights Templar for those who are not familiar with their history. They were originally founded in 1119 in Jerusalem. 9 knights, but some historians say it could have been up to 20. So they took monastic vows of poverty, chastity and obedience, and King Baldwin II gave them a place to live near the ruins of Solomon's Temple, hence the original and true name of the order, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. Now, their job was to protect the pilgrims on the road between the city of Joppa and Jerusalem, which was the primary pilgrim route, and it was infested with bandits, thieves, murderers who would rob and murder the pilgrims. So even though this road was a 40-mile stretch, these knights began to have some impact on the safety of the pilgrims. So during the first decade of the order, they certainly were poor, sometimes riding 2 knights to 1 horse. They were struggling financially, they were struggling to survive as an order until Hugh de Payne, the first Grand Master, travelled to Europe to inform people of their poverty. And this was a key move because after this, they gained the patronage of the nobles of the time, powerful people who donated a lot of land, and through this they also secured new recruits. And to top it all off, the Council of Troyes, the Catholic Church, made all Templar property exempt from church tithes and taxes. Also, a very important addition to this support was Bernard of Clairvaux, who was highly influential and was later declared a saint by the Catholic Church. Now, he wrote a monastic rule for them and also wrote a very popular essay titled In Praise of the New Knighthood. And this encouraged people to admire and support the Templars for what they were doing, as essentially they were highly trained soldiers and monks protecting the pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem. So in a relatively short space of time, the Templars had received so many donations that a number of commanderies were set up in order to manage that property. And it then became apparent they needed, their own ships to carry new recruits and supplies and so on. And so a Templar navy was built, and they needed castles, and so they built those as well. And 50 years later, the Templars had at least 1,000 knights in the Holy Land, plus new recruits, squires, sergeants, archers, all those, and those who also occupied lesser status positions would total about 10,000 men. So recruits and support came from all over Europe, and they became an international military order, and they were only answerable to the Pope, and so they didn't have to acknowledge the authority of any local lords or even kings. So the Templars weren't the only knights centred in the Holy Lands. They were the Teutonic Knights and the Knights Hospitallers, and all these guys were at the very epicentre of the Crusades. And the Crusades were a series of wars fought between the Christians and the Muslims for primary control of the Holy Lands, which was an important spiritual place for the Christians and the Muslims and the Jewish people. The Templars, due to all these extremely generous donations, very quickly became extremely wealthy indeed, even though a Templar rule forbids them from having money of their own as an individual. But as an order, they were more than well off. And so it makes sense that they needed to devise various financial systems in order to manage and transfer funds from one place to another securely. Thus, the first international bankers were birthed. And the Grand Masters of the Order would serve as financial advisors to the kings that supported the Crusades for, over 100 years. So after the ultimate failure of the Crusades, the Templars became very much a target to blame for this. And by this point, they were super rich, they had untold privileges and were envied by many, including Philip IV of France. And it was Philip IV of France who convinced Pope Clement V of the heresy of the Templars. And since the Templars were only answerable to the Pope, this is what Philip needed and conspired to attain to. Which was the downfall of the Templars, because he was financially broke and he wanted to take the Templar wealth. So at dawn on Friday the 13th of October 1307, coordinated raids and mass arrests played out in every Templar chapter house in France on charges of heresy. The Templars were tortured into false confessions of secret initiation rituals involving renouncing Christ, spitting on the cross, and other offences such as sodomy and worshipping an idol called Baphomet, which actually was a medieval French mispronunciation of Muhammad. So the idea here was that the Templars had been sympathising with Muslims or the enemy, or that they'd gone over to the enemy's side then. So later on, King Philip pressured Pope Clement into decreeing that the Templars residing elsewhere in Europe be arrested as well, not just France. So 7 years later, when the last Grand Master of the Templars, Jaques de Molay, was executed, he was burnt at the stake in 1314 as he was dying. It is said that he spoke a curse against King Philip and Pope Clement, and subsequently both King Philip and Pope Clement were dead before a year had passed. And so Jaques de Molay's death marked the end of the Templars. And all endings have new beginnings, so they say, and this is where the Templars now officially begin their journey into myth and legend. Today, there are countless myths and legends associated with the Templars in popular culture, including unfounded rumours, lots of fiction novels and films. It's clear that people remain fascinated with the Knights Templar. So let's list some of the myths associated with the Templars. So apparently they held the secrets of the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant. They are linked to the mysteries of René le Chateau and the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. They are guardians of an ancient and secret wisdom. They discovered important historical and spiritual documents or scrolls underneath Solomon's temple. that Freemasonry was descended from the Knights Templar traditions that continued on in secret in Scotland. Also, they had a piece of the True Cross they carried into battle. Well, maybe they had a piece of something. The True Cross, I doubt it was. They were really Rosicrucians, or they were keepers of the holy relic, the Shroud of Turin. Or maybe they did, after all, worship an idol called Baphomet, and that they worshipped a mysterious head. And some myths claim that the Templars are strongly linked with Gnosticism and the lineage of the Assassins. So let's take a look for a moment at Jaques de Molay's curse, simply because it's not been proven either way whether he did or didn't curse them. However, after the supposed curse and Molay's death, 1 month later, Pope Clement dies. Later that same year, King Philip dies in a hunting accident. And not only that, but each of Philip's sons also die at a young age, putting an end to the continuance of Philip's lineage, as there was no one to succeed him, and his entire house just fizzled out. Now, curses can have some devastating effects. A curse that is the last word spoken by a person before they die are particularly potent, and so it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was actually true. You know, if you put yourself in Jaques de Molay's shoes for a moment, and you had been betrayed by the leader of your faith, and lies had been told about you and your men by someone who was consumed by greed and power, and you had been tortured, and now you were burning for this, I think the last words out of anyone's mouth are going to be damning the people who put you there in that position. That's human nature. And so I would be inclined to believe that Jaques de Molay did curse the Pope and the King, and that curse did in fact play out. That's what I believe. Now, as for the rest of the myths and the legends, not so much, or in some cases, not at all. I have been witness to curses, and I have seen, firsthand the effects they can produce. They can cause illnesses, terrible runs of bad luck, and death. In some cases, if that curse is strong enough, multiple deaths. Many curses, especially ones that are wielded in the name of justice, because someone has been truly wronged, they do have a powerful reach. Moving on, I want to now talk about my experiences of working with the Knights Templar in spirit. Spirit guides can take whatever form they wish, but usually they take the form of a memorable life that they lived, and the qualities and principles and experience they gained through that life is part of the wisdom and the guidance that they offer. So if you're not working with spirits at the moment, I'll briefly say that an introduction to working with spirits is where you're going from intermediate psychic development into advanced spirit communication territory. So as far as spirit guides are concerned, whoever shows up for you is a highly personal thing. And some people may only ever work with one spirit their whole life, and others may work with many. So it may surprise some people that a Templar spirit would work with any kind of pagan, witch, magician, shaman, or a magical practitioner of any kind, since they were all Catholic monks. But some of these guys do function as spirit guides, especially the higher ranking, more evolved souls who did incarnate and become Templars. Now, their function was essentially highly spiritual, whether at the time as soldiers they realised it or not. They moved our evolution forward, particularly in the banking department, and so they, or one of them, may appear as a guardian or a guide for those who follow the spiritual warrior path, or have a career in the armed forces, or in banking, or in real estate. Another thing is that people may assume that these spirits work exclusively with more clandestine organisations and shady spiritual groups, or the Freemasons in particular. But the truth is, they will work with people who are developing their psychic faculties, and they can and they do show up and take the role as a guide and a protector if need be, and they take that role very seriously. They can come as a single spirit, just one night, or they can come as a group. However, as an order, if you get one night, the rule as I understand it seems to be that the entire order stands with that one night. So essentially what you're dealing with is a highly developed spiritual force or a team. So even though they were monks, they were highly trained warriors, and it doesn't stop there. So as an order, they were collectively skilled in many areas, and so they hold many beneficial functions for the developing spiritual practitioner and in other areas of life as well. So as a group, they hold an elevated consciousness to aid in psychic development. They provide psychic protection. They can guide you in your financial affairs if you are studying or have careers in the field of building or architecture, as I already said, real estate, even farming the land. They also assist with safe or uninterrupted travel if you're someone who travels a lot. Now, how I became aware of the brother, as the name I know him by, is a story that comes in bits and pieces, building up over a number of years. And it all started when I was about 8 years old. I was randomly drawing with a marker pen, nothing in particular, just scribbles really, until I looked at it and realised that what I had drawn quite clearly was a knight standing behind a curtain, or half standing behind a curtain. And I showed that drawing to my father, and he thought it was great. But I tried to explain to him, that I didn't mean to draw it. And obviously, at that time, I had no idea of anything to do with spirituality. None of my family practiced any kind of religion or had any psychic or magical knowledge. So anyway, skip ahead to the age of 27 when I received my calling, the shamanic call, which wasn't particularly pleasant. And around about this time and intermittently afterwards, I had a number of visions. And one of those visions involved a group of knights who, when I asked who they were, simply replied, we are comrades. And that was all I knew, that they were around me, that they were there. So fast forward a year or two, and I was sat in my living room reading, and I glanced up, and there in the curtain, or the creases and pattern of the curtain, looked to be a knight standing there. So again, the knight was associated with the curtain, and it was like a sort of psychic scrying that wasn't intentional at all. I didn't sit down to scry, I was reading a book. But he was there, and as soon as I became aware of him, his presence in the room became intense. I couldn't stop staring at it. It took my attention completely away from what I was reading, and at the time I wasn't even recalling what I had drawn all those years ago, or the vision I'd had. None of that even entered my head at this point. So it was only in hindsight, since I started to gather it together, all the different times I've encountered this knight, for the purposes of putting these encounters together in an orderly fashion, that I realised that this was a spirit that had been with me for a long time. So the next encounter was a few years later, when I was working in a magical capacity with a magical partner, and it became apparent that we had the spirit of a knight who we were working with, and who only referred to himself as the brother. It kind of baffled me at the time, because we couldn't figure out why he was calling himself the brother, and yet he presented as a knight, until it became known to us that he was a knight, but he was also a monk. And so the brother is how we addressed him. And after that, I was drawn or guided to, research Knights Templar, which I knew absolutely nothing about. And he wanted me to learn more about them, and that was how he introduced himself very gradually over a period of many years. And of course I became fascinated because their story, their history, let's face it, it is fascinating. As I said, and as they demonstrated to me, they can come as one knight or as a group. But to clearly get my point across here, if you are dealing with one knight, you can be assured that there is going to be more of them that assist that one knight that is in turn assisting you. So that is my understanding of how they operate in the spirit. And they are a fountain of assistance if you take the time to build the rapport. So for me, this knight just kind of turned up as a spirit guide. But as I understand further, the Templars are willing to work with people who call upon them for assistance, particularly if you have interests or a career in any of the areas they specialise in, and for people who are serious about their spiritual development. So why would a Templar choose to work with someone like me? Answer: the dynamics of spirituality are changing and evolving. We are happy to assist those on a non-specific individual spiritual path, and those also on the warrior path. We work with those who are open to working with us in this way, no matter the creed or religion. It doesn't matter here in the spirit world. Unity and separation is a paradox. We help people overcome difficult life challenges. Discipline is a useful skill to master. We protect those who travel for spiritual purposes. Our code of chivalry still holds true. That's just some of the information that I've gained from them. So also I have asked if there was an inner mystical order. Answer: we travelled to many places and learned of many different spiritual practices, but we did not practice anything other than Christianity. The alternative symbolism you find in our wake demonstrates our knowledge. That is all. This eclectic knowledge of different spiritual practices may be commonplace in your time, but it was rare in our time. So there you go. They may have had knowledge of other practices, but they did not practice anything other than Christianity. They were devout Christians, and they were willing to lay down their lives for their faith. Now, if there is anyone out there now who is wanting to work with Templar spirits and the affinity is there, then you can do this very simply. If you feel that strong pull towards them, that's usually a good sign that they are already with you and waiting for you to formally acknowledge them and formally ask them to step into your spiritual space and assist you. You know, you can light a candle and you can pray and ask them. Very simple. You know, if you wanted to carve the words Knights Templar into the candle before you light it, you can do that as well. Now, my practice involves working with them as and when required, or sometimes the brother will just show up for whatever reason. I also honour them on Friday the 13th, when that comes, they tend to come around as a significant day for them. Even though it was a date associated with a downfall, nobody knows the actual day that the order was founded, only the year or thereabouts. So Friday the 13th is a memorable date to work with, and you can honour the Templars on that day. You could set up a small altar. Now, setting up an altar doesn't mean you're worshipping the Templars. It means you are setting aside a special place in order to honour them and work with them in a spiritual or magical capacity. Now, I'm getting down to the nitty-gritty here, guys. I'm not going to hold back on this information. Now, being a magical practitioner, I also have in my arsenal my own version of war water, which is a war water and a storm water, which was collected in a red vessel on Friday the 13th of October 2013, and again in the December, which is particularly potent stuff. I mean, you can, if it does happen to be raining on Friday the 13th. I mean, you can do this. You can collect the water and you can use it for various purposes. So that brings me to another advantage of working with the Templars in the spirit. So if you build that rapport with them and take the time to build rapport with them, they not only provide spiritual and magical protection, but they are also willing and perfectly able to go on the offensive on your behalf. And I am talking specifically about battle magic, magical warfare and justice magic. So if you're working magic on behalf of victimized people or severely repressed groups, or if you are petitioned to help someone with issues of abuse because the perpetrator was never brought to justice, that's the kind of work I'm talking about here. Now, they are prepared and able to go on the offensive on your behalf with that kind of work. And for myself, as a dedicated priestess of Morrigan who deals with all kinds of spirits of war, the Templars are or certainly the Templars I work with, serve as a kind of additional force, like an added on extra unit that covers perhaps certain bases that other spirits maybe don't cover. So to round things up, these knights were ultimately betrayed by the Catholic Church. They were betrayed by everything they stood for, and they are willing to work with people who have the minerals to deal with them on a spiritual and magical level, because their presence, guys, I'm not going to lie to you, is intense. You know about it when they come through. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. As you can see, I could talk about the Templars for hours. I think this is maybe one of the longest videos I've done, and I'm likely to make a couple more on this subject in the future. So please do subscribe, like and share, as it helps me out a lot, and check the description box for any relevant links. I'm the Red Lady, and I will see you soon.